Larry, my friend, it's so good to see you. We talk more than people might know, but we don't do very many podcasts together. So this is a rarity.
This is a rarity, but it's fun, man. And I think one of the best ways to start this is maybe just share how we even met. Do you believe that this April in 2024, it's gonna be 9 years, man? It's almost a
9
decade.
years.
Yeah,
That's so
it's
weird because
crazy.
I remember starting this, and you were going to tell me how we met. I'm like, hold on, because I don't remember. I almost feel a little bad that I don't remember how. Maybe I will when you share it. How did we first meet?
I just remember on my end, like what I remember about it. And I always know that when people share stories of how they met, sometimes it's all due to interpretation. But here's how I remember. So I started the Good Dad Project podcast, which is obviously now the Dad Edge, in April of 2015. And I don't even know how I got connected with this guy. And I think his Lewis Cognan was his name,
Oh
but
yeah,
he
yeah,
was,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. So he had this
Luis.
giant Luis. Yeah. He had this giant, you know, uh, group, and I can't remember what the group was called, but it was basically for podcasters who were looking to help other podcasters, and it was a free group. And he had a huge Excel spreadsheet for us to go in and listen and rate and review each other's podcasts. And so I remember going in there, and there's a lot of there was podcasts all every over every genre possible.
Of
And I
course.
remember I remember specifically looking for other guys who were podcasting, right? Because I really wanted to connect with other men. And yours, I was like, order a man. I was like, that's really interesting. And I went in and I listened to, I think, one or two of your episodes, but I listened to one of them that was your story. And I was like,
Hmm.
holy shit. I was like, this guy's story is almost identical as mine. And then I think it was me that messaged you and I said, hey man, I just rated and reviewed your show. And I just want to say, man, like your background and mine is pretty crazy similar. And I just want to connect with you and basically say hello. And then it, I don't remember exactly what happened from there, but it turned into us going on each other's podcasts, connecting, and then having a friendship with you now for the past 9 years.
Yeah, that I do remember Luis, and I remember that group that we were part of and connecting with you. And I'm like, oh, finally, somebody's actually having this conversation. Because I
Yeah.
remember when we started 9 years ago, not many people were I don't know if there was anyone. I mean, the only person that comes to mind is Brett McKay with Art of Manliness.
Yep. Yeah. He was,
And
yeah. And then
and
I
he
think
was
there was
doing
dad.
phenomenal work. What
Yeah.
what was that?
I think there was another one too, Dad Tired. It was more towards dads, but it was definitely another guy show.
Okay,
Um,
yeah.
but yeah, Brett McKay was definitely the guy then. Yeah.
I mean, he's a huge inspiration for me. And I
Same.
think Brett does good work, but it's a little bit different. I remember the first, this one's funny. My first article, I'd have to actually go back and look and see if it's still on the website, was how to throw a baseball.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that was my first
That was your
article
first
about
one.
fastball, four seam, two seam, curveball, knuckleball, change up, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Which I think, every man should know how to throw some basic pitches to his son or whoever it might be. But that was very Art of Manliness esque.
Yeah.
And as much as I think Brett's doing a phenomenal job in that department, there was a real gap in the kind of conversations that you and I are having now, which are more deep and meaningful rather than here's how to throw a baseball, here's how to dress, and all these things are applicable for men. But man, I wanted to go so much deeper than that, and I'm really, really fortunate that you and I found that niche as quickly as we did. Do you think it was luck or timing or strategy or intelligence? I mean, I know for me it's not the latter, but what do you think when you think back about how it's been for you and your growth over the past 9 years? Because I've thought a lot about this for myself.
I mean, I share this story quite a bit, which is it's just kind of funny, which is I actually I had the ideas for 10 good shows. And then after that, I was like, after these 10 shows, I think I'm like on God's good humor. And I got to be honest, like this was a hobby for me in the beginning. And I was like, I'm not really sure where this is going to go. And then I know you just crossed over 1100 episodes a few weeks ago. We just crossed over 1100 episodes. And I'm actually floored at, I don't call it luck for anything because I think you and I both know that we work extremely hard doing this work, and we work and we're diligent and we're consistent. Like I've seen over the years too, and I know you know other podcasters and content creators like this, where they'll go strong for like a season or like 6 months or maybe even a year, and then they're like, oh, I just kind of do it every now and again. And as far as I know, I don't think you've ever missed one show. I've never missed one show in the 9 years that we've been doing this. It's always been consistent.
Yeah, to be fair, there's a little asterisk by my record. I want to be I've been really transparent about my life, especially over the past year
Yeah.
and a half, where there was probably 3 to 5 shows that were replays from previous shows where
Yeah.
I couldn't do it, man. Like I
Oh
tried to
yeah.
get
Yeah.
up and record, and I'm like, I'm going to talk to these guys about being a better man, and I'm over here, losing my marriage. Yeah, to your point about luck, I think you're right. It's not luck. There's a lot of people who will say things like, "Oh, I've had people say this. Tell me if you've heard this. Oh, I wish I could dink around on Facebook or social media all day," as if that's what you and I do, right? I'm like, yeah, sure, go ahead and do that. See how that works out for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah. That.
also think, if I'm being honest, there is an element of, maybe it's not luck, but like timing. Maybe. I mean, we hit it right 9 years ago. I remember times where I don't know, walk into a gas station and start talking with a friend or an acquaintance, and they're asking what I do for work. And I would tell them I have a podcast, and they'd say, well, what's your real job? you know, these were the early days of podcasting, where not a lot of people knew what a podcast was, or that you could even make money doing what we're doing.
Mhm. Yeah, I still get that to this day. They're like, and I'll joke with people that don't know about the dad edge, just because I just want to see what their reaction is sometimes. Like, what do you do for a living? I was like, I make a living on a microphone. They're like, oh, you're a
Mm,
DJ. Are you on the radio? I was like, no. I was like, I have a podcast. And they're like, and they usually look at me like, you can make a living at that. So like I
yeah.
hear that question a lot. Or the same thing. They're like, do you have a full-time job? I was like, that is my full-time job. I podcast, I write books, we coach, we speak, we hold events. Like it's a huge organization. But yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think back then when you and I first started, it was even more of a question mark. Like, wait a second, like how in the world can you actually create an organization, a business, a movement, bring value to others by just doing that, but I think people know a little bit more today than they did then.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's more available. I actually have seen over the past 9 years that there's this growing movement of men who really do want to connect with other men, whether it's locally, regionally, digitally, across the globe and planet, which are things that you and I are both doing in our own right. It's pretty inspiring to see and to know that both you and I were a big part of that. And I try not to let my ego get the better of me, but if we're looking at it as objectively as we possibly can, I can't really point to many other figures except for Brett McKay and a handful of other guys who have been as instrumental as what we've been able to do in this men's arena, if you will, than we have over the past nearly decade now.
Yeah, there hasn't been. I think there's been a few guys in the space that have definitely created, some ripples here and there. I look at a guy like John Broman, who's got Front Row Dads. He's doing
Mm-hmm.
some really fantastic work. I see other guys like, I mean, Garrett White, he's a warrior, but he's doing men's work as well. But I think we're seeing a higher level, higher number of men who are trying to do the work. But I do look at us 10 years ago, and it is quite fascinating. I think you and I were part of the few that were just like, yeah, we'll go ahead and go first. I mean, I know Brett was kind of like the first, but I would say we were more the originals. And I know some of the things we're going to be discussing today is just some of the enlightening things that we've learned over the years doing this work now
Yeah.
9 years.
My question is, and I'm always trying to break down successful people. So guys that listen to the podcast, they know this. They know what you do. They know what I do. I'm really intrigued and fascinated by successful individuals, male or female, doesn't matter to me. If they're successful in their own right, I want to know how, why, where, what, when, all the questions, right? And that's what we do on our podcast. I'm really curious what you think. Again, I'm trying to be as objective as possible. And objectively, both you and I have had a lot of success in this. what do you attribute that to? Because I want to figure out what it is so I can double down on it and figure out a way that we can serve not hundreds of thousands, not millions, but tens and hundreds of millions of men across the planet.
So the feedback that I've gotten on why the dad edge resonates with people, and I think, to be honest, like if I look at your journey, even over the past year and a half, the feedback that I've gotten over and over again is you're a real guy. Like you're a real imperfect person who's still on this quest of learning. And when I'm behind this microphone or we're doing any type of teaching, the way I have always viewed it is, yes, I'm a leader. Yes, I've learned quite a few instrumental lessons that have helped me in marriage, that has helped me raise my kids, that have helped me in my own mental and emotional state, even physically, even in business. But I will never, ever think that I know everything. And I will always, always be a lifelong learner. Always. Like, I mean, you and I started this movement before you and I even had teenagers. And now we're raising teenagers. So it's like, even now, like I'm so curious to constantly learn. I think that's why you do the podcast. That's why I do the podcast, because I genuinely want to talk to people who are experts in their field, who are smarter than I am, so I can learn. And the way that I view this thing is we can all learn. Let's all go learn together. Yes, do you and I know a thing or two because we've been at the helm of this thing? Absolutely. Do we know everything? Not at all. But I think the more we communicate, like, listen, I know a thing or two, but I'm also a student right there learning with you, and we all get to learn together. But it's really the authenticity, I think, that's more relatable. So I think as soon as we start preaching from the pulpit, I think that's when people shut down a little bit, when they don't even view you as a real person with problems that are even similar to theirs.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true, is that you're down in the trenches, so to speak, with the guys going through the same issues, going through the same struggles, going through the same problems, and maybe you can shed some light on how to overcome it. Man, I thought that about with what we're doing. Especially, I thought my business was going to collapse. I thought this movement was going to collapse when I started talking about alcohol abuse and what eventually led to the breakdown of my marriage and divorce. I thought we're done here. This is it. And I would have understood, actually, like, I don't think that would be unreasonable. But I found the opposite.
I'm sure
that I think more people have rallied around what we're doing. More people recognize the realness of what we're doing. And there's a humility that I've tried to approach the conversations I have with that. And I was getting a little arrogant. I was getting a little big for my britches, if I'm looking back at it. And now I don't feel that way, just because life has a way of, kicking you in the balls and telling you you're not as good as you think you are. Maybe it's not life. I should not attribute it to life. I did it to myself. That's probably a better way to look at it. But I found thousands of men who are like, oh, thank you. Like, what do you mean? Thank you. Like, thank you for telling me that, I didn't have this all figured out and I failed my family. Like, what do you mean? Thank you. Thank you for being real. Thank you for telling me your struggles. Now I know that if you can overcome it, I can overcome it, because you're a regular dude. And that's right. That's all I am. And that's all you are. But man, these people prop themselves up on pedestals. And I would just tell guys that listen to what we're doing is, be careful of propping even us, you and me, on pedestal. Like, don't put us on a pedestal. Please do not put me up on a pedestal. Listen to the message, implement it to the degree that you can or have a desire to, but don't prop me up, because I promise I'll fail you. I will 100%. I will fail. I've failed, and I will at some point in the future fail you if you do that. So listen to the message, apply what works for you, but don't ever worship a human being, right? In any degree.
I 100% agree with that. We always say, I don't know if you remember the hair club for men commercials.
Yeah, totally.
Where the guy, like, I mean, like, I still remember those commercials to this day, like being a little kid watching those commercials. And I'll never forget the guy saying, like, hey, not only am I the founder and the president, but I'm also a client. He holds up that picture of him being bald before. And while that's really funny, but there's that relatability factor. It's like when guys are watching that, they're like, holy shit, like, this guy understands firsthand. He's not just like this perfect, individual who's, wealthy and whatever, but he understands exactly where I'm at and what I'm probably going through. I think there's a lot to be said about that relatability. I think when people are very authentic, especially leaders, I think it makes you gravitate towards them even more, that message even more, because they're like, well, man, like if this guy can overcome things, well, what am I capable of? Right.
Yeah. Well, even that term is interesting to me, authentic, because when I hear it, I hear it through the marketing lens because I'm a marketer. I mean, that's part of what we do. We market our business and our movement, and we try to communicate it in a way that will reach as many men as possible and serve them in a positive way. When I hear authentic, I mean, that term has been bastardized.
I
And
agree.
it's almost synonymous with disingenuous. Like, you be authentic, and then they create this thing, and it's like, is that the real you? That's what I was creating. Is that the real me? No, this is the real me now, where it's, stripped down of that bravado and that ego and the showmanship that came with that. And I see a lot of guys who I'm close with personally that are doing the same thing. And I've talked to them. Hey, look, pride comes before the fall. I'm only telling you that because I love you, I care about you, and I don't want to see you fall the way that I did. But it's hard to convince somebody the path they're going down is not a positive one.
Well, I agree. I mean, I think we see those people, online, and there is a certain there's a lot of ego with some folks, and I get that. And, maybe that works for them. But what I've noticed is leaders will attract, I think, people that follow them, that they attract. And that type of leader attracts a certain type of person. And to be quite honest, I don't know if I'm really interested in that. I'm more interested in, for instance, guys like you and I, like, to where that pride and that bravado is, I think it's there to some degree, but there's a ton of realness behind that. And I think those are some lessons that we've had to learn over the years. I mean, one thing in particular, one of the lessons I want to learn that I want to share with you, because I know one of the things we talked about was lessons learned, is I remember starting this movement, and I did it for, number one, I really wanted to learn how to be a better father and husband because I didn't feel like I had the tools. But I got to be honest, I also did it because there was a part of me that was angry and unforgiving of my dad. My dad left when I was one. I ran in, I had a relationship with him, a very short one, when I was 12 that lasted 6 months. And then he was out again. And then I didn't meet him until I was 30, and that was by accident. And I got to be honest, Ryan. I mean, there was a part of me, it's like, I'm so passionate about this movement, and I don't want any man to experience what I did. And I don't want any of his kids to experience what I did growing up. And I got to admit, when I first started this, there was some anger that really fueled this. Like, it really fueled it. And what I've learned, and I know you've recently just interviewed Gary John Bishop, and so did I. And I read his book, his last book. I've read it 3 times. It's called Grow Up, Become the Parents Your Kids Deserve. There's a chapter in there that really made me dig deep and really evolve and grow. And it was a tough growing pain, but it's incredible relieving now. So I used to look at my dad as, well, he left because he didn't care, or he left because he had other things going on. And if I'm being really real, a lot of us, I don't think, really look at our own parents as human beings. We look at them as parents, and they should have done a better job. And the way that Gary's message really resonated with me, and the element around forgiveness, is, my dad is a human being. And actually, I give him a shit ton of credit right now, and I'm going to share why here in a second. But my dad was raised in a really abusive environment. I won't go into the details for his privacy, but it was bad. He was also adopted. So it was a really tumultuous upbringing for him. And there's a lot of things he went through. Well, then he meets my mom, when he's like 21 years old. He's still a kid. He's in the military, off to Vietnam, sees a lot of things, deals with PTSD, then becomes a father at the young age of 25, trying to navigate that, moving all over the country to different stations. And all the while trying to make this marriage work, trying to be a brand new father while also dealing with his own trauma. And I used to think my dad left because he didn't care, when in actuality, my dad left because he felt that he was actually doing more harm than good. Now, whether we agree with that was the right move or not, that's not the point. But here's what I will tell you. My dad is 75 years old now, and I've forgiven him. And I actually give him quite a bit of credit now, because the guy opened up his entire life back up to me and my whole family 18 years ago. He didn't have to do that. He still shows up to my kids' football games, to their wrestling meets, to their little league games. We still see him on holidays. We spend time with him. And I know for him, that isn't probably the easiest thing in the world, because my entire family knows the past, but they also know, there's been forgiveness there. But I actually give the guy a lot of credit now, and a lot of bravery and a lot of strength that I didn't used to before, because at the end of the day, the guy is a human being that just didn't make the right decision. But the only people that, one thing I've really realized, and I'll finish up here, is that when we hold that grudge or we harbor that unforgiveness, it just eats us alive. It does nothing to him, just eats us alive. And just recently I've let it go in the past, but just recently, man, I've really let it go and just been at peace with it.
Well, one thing I'm hearing you as you say that is like, you don't, there's so many guys that deal with forgiveness and a lot with their fathers, like you're talking about. I personally don't have that issue. I don't hold any ill will. I don't think I ever really did. I think there's probably some conditioning that maybe I act on subconsciously, but I don't think I ever had real hatred or hostility or animosity towards my father. But one thing that I like about what you're saying is that there's real empowerment in forgiving somebody else. You may have been the link that he needed. I don't know. I don't know enough about your story, but you may have been the link that he needed to re-engage, to get back into it. If you offered and afforded him grace, you didn't have to do that. And I don't even think you can say this about yourself because of the pride conversation we're having. But I would say to you from the outside looking in is your willingness to be the bigger man and offer some grace and forgiveness might have been the key that he needed to unshackle himself from shame and guilt and remorse and sorrow over decades of knowing that he wasn't doing what he should have been doing. And you released him from that by forgiving. That's powerful.
Thanks, man. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm curious about you though with your dad. I know that your dad left. How old were you? Remind me.
3. Yeah, I was 3.
3.
Yeah. But we
And
always had
I've
a pretty decent relationship.
Yeah.
For what it was. He lived in a different place than I did, and I would go see him once or twice a year. And I remember my mom telling me she always knew when it was time for me to see my dad because I'd get really angry and frustrated and restless. But if I went and visited him, then I would come back without that. It was a little different, and I think that's something that
It's
just men
interesting.
bring into other men's lives, and specifically with their sons, that temperament, right? To be able to temper the anger and the masculinity that's coursing through our veins. So yeah, I mean, we had a strained relationship, I think is how I would describe it, but never any hostility or animosity towards him. I actually ended up missing his death. He was in the hospital, and I pushed it off and pushed it off and pushed it off and thought he was going to be okay. And I actually ended up missing his passing by 30 minutes. I went down to
I didn't know that.
California. Yeah,
Wow.
that was rough, man. That was about 5, 6 years ago now. And my mom called me and said, "Hey, your dad had a heart attack. You should get a hold of him." I'm like, he'll be okay. Cause he had another heart attack before. And she's like, "Nah, I really think you should get a hold of him." I'm like, "Nah, it's okay. He's fine." The next day, "Hey, dad's struggling. Like, give him a call." I'm like, "Nah." The next day, she's like, "Hey, you really need to come down and see his internal organs are shutting down. He's not doing
Mm.
well. He's probably going to pass away." So I
Wow.
loaded my 2 oldest boys with me and I said, "All right, let's go." We drove to California, and about 30 minutes out, my mom called me and she said, "Hey, where are you?" I said, "Well, we're like 30 minutes away." She's like, "Okay, hurry and get here. We'll see you when you get here." And I got there, and I met her in the lobby of the hospital, and she had tears in her eyes, and I kind of knew what was coming. And she said, "Hey, I'm really sorry. Your dad died 30 minutes ago." And man, that sucked. Like,
Dude, I did not
I
know that.
left,
I didn't know that.
yeah, I left my two oldest boys in the lobby with my mom, their grandmother, and I went in and, just to see my dad sitting there, his lifeless body, somebody that I love, and actually looking at it now, I have a lot of respect for him in a lot of ways. There's still some things that I think he could have handled differently, but I think if he was here in this conversation with us, he would say the exact same thing. I think he would probably acknowledge that. And I think if I gave him the chance to do that and I didn't, he would have acknowledged it when I had the chance to talk to him. But I never gave that to him.
Yeah.
And I think the lesson there, at least for me, and hopefully somebody else can walk away with this, is I know there's a lot of guys who are struggling with the relationship and the bond between their father. If you have an opportunity to make it right to some degree, whether it's just expressing how you feel, regardless of the outcome of that scenario, or saying, "Hey, dad, I forgive you," or saying, "Hey, dad, I'm sorry." Man, if you have the opportunity to do that and release him from what he needs to be released, you have the key. He doesn't have it. You have it. If you can release him from that and you can release yourself from that, take advantage of that while you can, because it's gone like that. 30 minutes, man. 30 minutes. Could have seen him and I could have said some different things, but I didn't get the chance.
Yeah, man, that is unreal. I didn't know that. I didn't know that that had happened, or at
Yeah.
least that I knew your dad had passed away, but I didn't know that story.
Yeah, I don't talk about it a whole lot because it's
Yeah.
painful, dude. I didn't conduct myself well in that moment. And that's something I'll live with forever. And I believe my faith tells me that at some point we'll be able to embrace as father and son and have a couple of conversations that we should have had 40 years ago. um, but I don't know. I mean, that's my faith. I don't know if that's true. I hope that's the case. And hopefully we can set the record straight, but I can't do it now. So
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
else?
Just to
What other types of lessons have you learned, Larry, well, actually, let me back up.
yeah.
I want to go back to something that you just briefly mentioned, and you and I had talked about this. You made a pivot, you made a shift in the name of your movement. It was the Good Dad Project to the Dad Edge. I'm actually
Mhm.
really curious about that shift because I like the Dad Edge better. I think it's more
Same.
representative of what you do. I think it's a little bit more catchy if we're looking at it from a marketing standpoint. I've never changed much of the marketing strategy with what we do, but I'm curious about your perspective on making that change.
Yeah. So I think for me, it's a good question, and it's kind of a funny story. So when I started Good Dad Project back in 2012, and this was after, yeah, I always because of how I was raised, with my mom was married 3 times and she dated a lot of guys in between, and every guy was just the same guy, just different face, different name, like
Mm,
just a man who is a partier, a drinker, an abuser, physically, mentally, emotionally. Like I was hit a lot growing up, beaten a lot growing up. And,
mm,
I, when I grew up and when I became a father, I was like, okay, there's one thing that's not, I'm going to do, there's a lot of things that are not going to happen on my watch. But one of them is I'm not going to strike my children out of anger. I'm just not going to do it. Now I know that there's some people who are like, no, you should spank. And there's other people like, oh, it's child abuse. And there's everything in between. I'm not here to fight that fight.
sure.
I just didn't want to do it. That's all. And in a fit of rage, when my son, who's now 15, who's now actually bigger and stronger than me now, I would never spank him now. He'd freaking put
Same
me through a
here.
wall. Oh, dude,
Same
like,
here.
yeah, you've got a power lifter and I've got a center, on the football team. And, but anyway, I spanked him out of a reactive bout of anger. And that was it. I mean, there were a lot of things that led up to that moment. My marriage wasn't the greatest. My patience with my boys, my oldest was 6 at the time, he was 4, and I was just, to be quite honest, I was just floundering. But I desperately wanted to be a better father, and I wanted to be a better husband. I just had no clue what that was. So on the night that I spanked him, went into my office and I started a Facebook page, and I never did it for a following or anything like that. And literally the very first words that like just came to my mind as I'm looking at that keyboard, because the thing popped up like, what do you want to name your page? And I just typed in the Good Dad Project. And that name was actually just for me. That was it, because I was the project. I was the project.
Hmm.
And
Mm.
as I developed that and even started a blog around it, the Good Dad Project, there was a part of me that really never felt that that's who I was. And even as we started the podcast, because the podcast was named that for the first 3 years, and it just never felt right to me. And I think because it didn't feel right to me is because if I'm a project, and I'm just speaking from a man's perspective and in the name, even though I'm a project, because I'm still a project, I'm still constantly learning. You're still constantly learning. We're constantly upgrading the software of our minds, being better, being growing stronger, all these different things. But I never liked the term project. And quite frankly, I didn't like the term good.
Yeah, I
Like I
don't
didn't
like
like
that.
good.
That's the word that gets me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like I want to be great. Right. So the name that always one word always stuck with me, and that's edge. And edge being like, hey, I'm a step ahead of things, or I know what to do in this situation because I've learned certain things, or at least I know more about, call it marriage or communication or leading my kids or whatever else. It's just you have that edge because you've learned those lessons and how to do it more effectively. And the dad edge, when that first came to my mind, when I first wrote that book, The Dad Edge, I was like, this name feels completely who I am. And I think and again, you talk about from a business perspective, organization perspective, I don't think dads want to be a good project at all. I think they want to have an edge. They want to be growing. They want to stay sharp. And I think that's what that name is all about.
I like it. I don't think men, the project doesn't bother me. Like I'm a work in process. Like that doesn't bother. It's good. I don't know
Good.
any men who have said, I'd really like to be good.
Yeah.
And it's not even the difference between good and great for me. It's good to me is almost synonymous with follow the rules.
Mm-hmm.
You know, do your job, toe the line, color within the line, sit down, be a good little boy. I'll pat you on the head or give you a little dog biscuit so that you feel good about your performance. I'm not interested. I don't know any men who are interested in that.
No.
Like,
Me neither.
have you ever asked your wife, like, oh man, or even thought, like, I really wish she thought I was a good person? Never.
Never. No.
Like, we want to be strong, we want to be bold, we want to be assertive, we want to be capable, we want to have an edge, like the competent. These are the things that we want. So I think that name is obviously it just is going to resonate more deeply with men than being good. And that's what society tells us as men is hey, be good, be
Yep.
good, be kind, be
Can't
nice.
stand that.
Not even kind, nice, be nice, be tolerant, compromise. I don't want any of that. There's certain things I'm willing to compromise on, and there's certain things I'm not. And I'm going to tell you what those things are, and I'm going to be bold, and I'm going to be assertive, and I'm going to call other men to do that. But that has nothing to do with being good. It has to do with being competent, capable, and courageous, I would say.
I would completely agree with all of that. I have a question for you though. I've been wanting to ask you this. So you and I both have 4 kids,
Yeah.
right? Now you and I knew each other before the 4 kid thing, but I'm
Yep.
so curious for you as you've evolved, because I know for me, raising 4 boys, you have 3, 1 girl. But I'm so curious as you look back on all the lessons you've learned from podcast guests, all the books you've read, because I know you're voracious, you're a huge reader. You read tons of books, as do I. But what have you learned about raising young men that's most important? And then what have you learned about raising a strong, confident young woman?
I think for the boys, one thing that I'm constantly learning is that they're not me.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's one thing I wrestled with for a long time. I wanted my oldest son to be me, to do it my way, to think like, and he does. He is a mini me for sure. But it's not specifically over the past several years, not because I forced him to be that way or encouraged or fostered that. It's just who he is. My second son is completely different, really different personality, into different things. I love hunting as an example. I asked him, I said, hey, do you want to go on this hunt with me in the spring? He's like, no, Dad, I don't. I said, why? It was so fun last year. He's like, it was fun. And I said, well, why don't you want to go back? And he said, well, Dad, it was so boring. Just sit there and wait. And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, yeah, we waited, but then you killed 2 pigs. You made great shots on 2 pigs. You killed 2 pigs. And he's like, well, yeah, that was fun. But we had to sit there and wait for it to happen. And then we got up early, like way early before the sun was even up. And then it was cold. It was like so cold out there. I'm like, well, he's got a good point. All three of those. You're going to be bored. You're going to be tired. You're going to be cold if you go hunting. And he's into completely different things. And I used to think, oh, what's wrong with him? Why isn't he doing these things that a man should do or that I'm into, sports and all this kind of stuff? And he does love sports. But the more that I acknowledge who they are and what they're into, and then foster their own desires and ambitions, the better relationship that we have. We're able to talk about things openly, even sensitive issues like drugs and pornography and girls and sex and all the things that, we have to talk to our sons about, or at least we ought to. We can have, just because I'm not so worried about them following in my footsteps, as opposed to making them capable of going out on their own and making their own path. But with a daughter, it's very much the same way. It's not a whole lot different for me. I want her to be strong and bold and capable. I really want her to be able to stand on her own 2 feet. I think that's more important in a lot of ways for a girl than it is for a boy, because it's so expected in society that a man be strong and capable and assertive. That's just, it's acceptable. It's the way it should be, right? But with a female, I think women can get railroaded and taken advantage of very, very quickly. So I want her to be somebody who is strong and bold and assertive and capable, who can say no, who can say yes to the right things and no to the wrong things and hold her own. But that's going to require her seeing what a man looks like in action. If I was a bum and I continued to drink and I continued to, not show up properly and be present for them, she would see that and say, oh, that's what a man is.
That's what a
And
guy does. Yep.
guess who she would go look for?
Yep.
Me, a younger version of me. And I'm not really interested in that. I want to show her. So I take her on dates and I open the door for her and I treat her the way that she needs to be treated. I don't treat her like a little princess, don't get me wrong, but I treat her like a young lady. Responsibility, obligations, duty, respect towards others, being capable of taking care of yourself, but also being ladylike. There's other women in her life, her mom, her grandmothers, who are very, very much women that have that great, strong feminine presence that I think I'll go ahead and say, entitled to as a young woman. That should be a right, that she's a right to access to other women who act feminine. I hope that answers the question, but those are some of the things that I've been dealing with.
No, that definitely answers the question. I think also it's something that I think a lot of guys that I've seen get tripped up on as well, which is we want, our kids to emulate like the strengths that we have, because we know firsthand what they're like, to use them. I've learned that lesson as well. I've also gotten caught up in the trap of, well, I want to push my kids to their potential, right? But in a way, also pushing them to things that aren't necessarily like who they are as an individual. I'll give you an example. So Mason, my 15-year-old, he's the football player. He's got all. Yeah, I look at him like he's got a ton of potential. I look at all the boys like they have a ton of potential, but I'll zero him on him in particular. So he wrote a book called Never Give Up No Matter What. This was years ago. And it was
So
all
awesome.
about his story of not giving up on football. And at events, I've had him speak, and then he's also actually been hired to speak at other events. And I see how impactful that story is and how much potential that story has to inspire others. And it was this year at the summit, I was like, hey, if you want to speak, I'd really, we'll make some room for you on how, from your point of view, from a young man's point of view, why young men shouldn't give up, and maybe giving these guys advice on how they can inspire their kids and not give up on things.
Mm-hmm.
And he looked at me dead in the eye and he goes, I gotta be honest, Dad, I have no interest in that. I was like, what? I was like, why? He goes, I don't like the public speak. He's like, I like to do a lot of things that don't make me comfortable, Like he actually loves to hunt. We've hunted together. So he doesn't mind the cold. He doesn't mind all that stuff. That's the kind of stuff he doesn't mind being uncomfortable. He is a savage on the football field. So he'll be uncomfortable all day long, work until he throws up and all that stuff. But you put him on a stage with a spotlight, he's like, I don't want any part of that. I just don't. That's not who I am. That's not who I want to be. I just don't want to do that. And but there's that part of me as his dad. I'm like, but dude, your message is so strong. You have so much potential with this message. You have no idea how many people you could inspire. And he's like, yeah, I don't want to do that. And it was actually my wife that actually kind of pulled me aside one night, and she's like, you might want to stop asking him to speak. Larry, like, he really just doesn't want to do it. I know you think that he should be doing it, or that you want him to do it because of the lessons learned. But at some point in time, you have to realize that's just not the person he is. And she goes, that's not the person I am. I have zero interest in getting up in front of people. So that was a really big lesson for me too, is that what you just said is every single kid is different, right? And they're not going to be like me, and they're not going to be like their brothers. Like Mason's older brother will do that stuff all day long, but he won't. But it's really understanding individually who these young people are, right?
Yeah, I mean, my oldest has a very similar story. He was doing a podcast with me called Man in the Making, and we enjoyed it. And we had a good time, and we were talking and doing our thing. And he's like, Dad, I'm not interested. I'm like, why? We need to keep doing it. Same thing.
Yeah.
He's like, no, I'm not interested. And I pushed. I was like, no, let's keep doing it. Let's keep doing it. Let's keep doing it. Guess what it did? Drove us further apart. It didn't serve anything. It didn't serve guys who were listening because he wasn't doing it. It didn't serve our relationship because he wasn't interested. And it's like, Dad's just trying to get me to do this thing. And then he began to believe that my motives were not pure motives, that it was like a manipulation tactic or strategy. And he was right. And it wasn't until I let go of it and I was like, maybe, yeah, fine. What else can we do? Well, we just got off a great 4-day hunt together. We spent hours and hours and hours in the stand talking about the same things we would have talked about on the podcast, but we didn't do it in front of an audience, and we did it over something that he enjoys being present in. Fine. If that's what it takes, I'm all in on that.
Yeah. I mean, you're still doing the same thing. It's just not the microphone, right? It's in the deer stand.
Exactly. And for some, it might be interesting to be in front of a microphone, and for others, it might not. And so what? It really doesn't matter. As long I learned this lesson actually pretty early on, but I didn't really adopt it fully until relatively recently. But my oldest, when he was younger, he was probably, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years old. And he's 15 now. He would say, Dad, I want to be a cowboy animal doctor. That's what he wanted to be, a cowboy animal doctor.
All right.
That's okay. Awesome. Let's do it. Like, what does that even mean? Let's do it. And there was a couple of veterinarian clinics here in town, and I called him up. I said, hey, my son is 8. He's really interested in what you do. Is it possible to come watch you for an hour? And they're like, yeah, sure. Come on over. And we watched a cat have a tooth extraction, which was hilarious because they had to feed a pill first. And then we watched a dog get neutered and, fed the chameleon some food, and like just did the whole gambit. And my son was into it. He loved it. That's our job as fathers. It's not to tell you what you should do. It's to foster what you think you ought to do. So if he wants to be a cowboy animal doctor, whatever that is, it's not my job to say yes or no. It's my job to say, great, let's figure out a path and let me help you blaze this trail and make it a reality. And now if I ask him now, he doesn't say that, but that was what he was into then. And so it's my job as a father to foster that, and whatever he's into now, as long as it's, reasonable or moral, I would say, then I'm all about it. Let's get after it.
I love that example, man, because it's, how many parents out there, they just want to have a kid or a son or daughter, really doesn't matter, that basically emulated their upbringing and basically turning them into the person that they want them to be versus the person that you're trying to foster them to be the best person they can be.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great example of really exposing a kid who's genuinely interested in something, and then deciding from that, like you said, you support it, give them the exposure to it. If they like it, great. If they don't, you can move on. I do have a question for you that's related to that. And I'm saying this question with a smile because it just came to my mind. But you and I
A
have
little
both.
worried about what this is now.
No, this is a good one. It's a good one. I think it'll be a good message for guys out there who parents who are in the stands and parents who coach. You and I have extensive experience in coaching our kids' teams, and we've both been on the spectator side as well as the coaching side. And I would love to hear what you have to say about the things that you have found effective about being a coach, the things that you have found ineffective with seeing other parents with really poor behavior in the stands. I've got my own 2 cents on this, but I'd love to hear your experience.
Well, one thing I started doing, I send out a text. This year, I coached one of my son's baseball teams, and I'm in the midst of coaching another son's basketball team right now. I only coach one team per season. So I won't coach 2 baseball teams or 2 basketball teams, but I'll shift. So I'm coaching another son's basketball team right now. And he's 7, and I can coach his team. If much older than about 10, they outgrow my coaching ability when it comes to basketball. Football, baseball, sure, but basketball, mm-mm. And one thing I started doing, this was really helpful, is I sent out a text before the season, and it's a group text to all the parents, and I say, hey, I'm your son's coach. Here's what time practice is. Here's where it is. Here's a link to the schedule. Don't text me and ask me when the game is. Don't text me and ask me when practice is. This is it. It's Wednesday nights at 7. Here's the link to the game. You're fully capable. I want your son to be there early, 10 minutes early, warming up, because we start exactly at 7:00, which means they need to be warm and ready to go. These are 7-year-olds. But some people would say, oh, that's pretty intense. No, it's not. It's a night a week. It's not intense. They can handle it. I promise, if the parents allow them to handle it. And we go for an hour, and I tell the parents, we play hard and we play to win. Like, this is not fun time. We play hard and we play to win, and we're here to learn about life in the context of basketball. If you have a problem with my coaching style, you can come to me directly. If you make it public, then you are volunteering to be my assistant coach. And I haven't had anybody take me up on that offer yet.
Yeah, I bet.
I have had people say, hey, Ryan, what if you try this? I say, that's a good idea. But it's always constructive when it's private. When it's public, it's usually it's criticism.
Yeah.
So that's been a big deal. Just asking other men to get involved. I can't believe how difficult it can be. I have a great assistant coach in basketball. His name's CJ. I can't believe how difficult it is to find another man who's like, come coach your kid. And they'll come up with all sorts of excuses like, well, I'm busy and I don't know anything about basketball. I don't know anything about basketball either. They're 7. I promise you know more about it than the 7-year-olds. It's going to be okay. Like, let's go play. From a player perspective, I think it's just letting them know that you're there for them. I remember one year, this was probably 4 years ago, I had a young player. He was probably, I don't know, eight or so. And he was up to bat and he got hit by a pitch and he really took it hard. Like, it hurt, no doubt. And I'm over there telling him, like, hey, don't rub it, like, tough it out, because that's what we do. And people don't get it. They don't get it. And they never will. Oh, I can't believe you'd say that. Well, you don't get it. We're raising men here. So I tell him, don't rub it. And he didn't rub it. And we eventually get out, and he was pitching the next inning. So he starts to pitch, and the kid hit a line drive at him, and it hit him right in the ribs.
Same kid who got hit?
Same kid.
Oh,
next, when he starts pitching, he gets hit in the ribs. And I call a timeout, and, the umpires are making me check on him and stuff. And of course I am. And I go up and I'm like, bud, are you okay? And he's like, yeah, I'm okay. I'm like, that looked like it hurt. He's like, it did hurt, coach. I'm like, yeah. I said, but you handled that awesome. Because I think if I remember correctly, he even made the play after. Like, he grabbed the ball and made the play, and then, kind of buckled. And I told him, I said, I'm just really proud of you for the way you handled it. And I said, I want you to strike out this next batter. Like, I'm not going to pull you out of the game. I'm not going to baby you. Like, you're doing good. This is a rough sport at times, and here's how it goes. But I want you to strike out this next batter. And he got up there and he's like kind of limping. And sure enough, he struck out the next batter. And I'll never forget the look on that kid's face. This sense of like pride and accomplishment. And he looked over at me just so proud. And I just kind of gave him a thumbs up or a nod. And I said, I knew you could do it, and man, that's what sports is, right? It's to let them get banged up and beat up physically, mentally, emotionally, and then help them develop the skill set required to overcome the hard obstacles that they're going to deal with in life. Because whether it's the football field or basketball court or baseball diamond, it's just a metaphor. That's all it is. It's a metaphor for life. And I had good coaches that raised me, and I don't really care if you win the state championship. I would like to, if there was a thing at 7 years old, that's what I want to win. That's why we're here. I want to win that. But if we don't, but they showed up fully and they learned and they grew and they're better than they were, and they're better, not just basketball players, but young men, then I did my job. That's what I'm there for.
See, I love that, man. That story too. That kid's never going to forget that.
I hope not.
No, he won't.
Always remembers it.
He will. I mean, well, number one, you get knocked in the ribs like that, 2 back-to-back hits, that you're going to remember that, but you're going to remember that message that, to stand in the fire and to still do your job, which he did. He proved he was able to prove a lot to himself in that moment. Yeah.
Can I share another story about just one more quick story?
Yeah.
Because I think it's important. We were talking about authenticity earlier. I sound awesome when I share that story. I'm like, oh, everybody's like, I want him as my coach. But let me share another story. We had a young man who was one of our pitchers, and he's a great athlete, really good athlete. And he was having a rough game. Can you still hear me, Larry?
Yeah.
Okay. I lost my earbuds there for a minute. Anyways, he was pitching and he had a really rough game. He just wasn't showing up the way that he could, and he was capable of showing up. And he went out as the last inning. I think we were up, and I said, hey, I just need you to get 3 outs. That's all I need. That's all we need. 3 outs and we're done. This game's over. We win. Man, he struggled. He was walking guys, hitting guys, and the other team got up. And instead of being the first coach of that story that I shared with you, which I was at the time, I was the other coach. And I berated him. And I made him feel like crap. And I put him down. And I shamed him. I'll remember that one forever.
Mm-hmm.
Like, eventually he got us out of the inning. We lost the game. That was my fault. That was 100% my fault, because I didn't elevate him in that moment. I pulled him down. I didn't pull him down. I pushed him down. And I could have done so much better. And I didn't. Like, I failed him, and then I failed our team. And I'll remember that one forever. I mean, again, about the pedestal thing, don't think just because somebody shares a positive story with you, they've got this all figured out. I've been on both sides of the equation. I know which one feels right and which one's good. And I know which one feels wrong and which one is horrible for the development of our young men. And that latter was not a great example of how I could have showed up as a coach.
It's a really powerful story, because just as people, I think, learn from, any podcast or any content, hey, I know what good looks like, but also maybe point out what not so good looks like, so I know not to fall in that same bear trap. A couple of stories that I have as well from just, number one, I love coaching my kids' sport. It's funny, your 7-year-old Otto and Colton they're both playing basketball. So I had signed up so I played a little bit of little league basketball, but I'm a lot like you. Like, once they get to be 9 or 10, like, I'm not your basketball coach. Like, I'll teach you how to dribble, teach you the rules. Other than that, strategy, yeah, that's not my jam. That's not my sport that I grew up on. But I signed up to be my 7-year-old's basketball coach, and then I injured my knee really bad. Mm-hmm. And I was on crutches, couldn't even drive for a while. So I had to, before the season started, I basically had to forfeit, being a coach, because I was like, man, if I can barely walk, and I did at the time, I thought I was pretty much destined for surgery, but I didn't know what the rehab was going to look like. I didn't know how long I was going to be out for, how long I couldn't drive. So I went ahead and I contacted the organization. I'm like, hey, I got to pull out of coaching. I was like, if you desperately need somebody, though, I'll figure it out. But as of right now, like, the health status of my knee and what I have to do, I don't know what it's going to bring. So, like, I don't want the season to depend on me. And we have 11 kids on our basketball team.
Dang.
Not one dad stepped up. And I showed up to the first I showed up to the first practice, and this kid's mom, and I coached this other kid's baseball team with Colton. And I was like, and I looked at her, I was like, Bethany, what are you doing here? She's like, I'm the coach. I was like, oh, I was like, you're the coach? She's like, yeah, nobody, nobody else would step up and do it. So I was like, holy shit. So I've been helping out, but she's officially the coach. But that was just very surprising to me that not one dad out of these 11 kids would step in and coach, which was really fascinating. But for me, I'll share a couple of things that I've noticed. Just about my dad's been in Missouri junior hockey. He's been the president of Missouri junior hockey for, I think, 20 years. So, and he really knows a lot about sports psychology with kids. But there's one thing that I did really, really poorly with my older kids. And that is I would coach them big time from the stands. Like I thought the louder I would bark of what they should do and not rely on that coach, the better off they were going to be. And man, that was a miss because the coach is there, all I'm doing is confusing them. Right. And all they're doing is I'm just creating more and more pressure and probably a bad experience for them. I've seen guys, and I get it because I used to be there too, but I had to learn the hard way. That's not the way you do it if you're not the coach. But I've seen guys, especially like my 9-year-old who's really into flag football right now. And Ryan, my son just got done with his quote unquote season. It's not even a season. It's a learn to play flag football league. They're not even playing games. Yeah. They're out there learning the basics. They're learning the positions. They're learning how to catch a ball. They're learning how to snap. I mean, they are learning like the bare. They're not even games. They're like scrimmages and that kind of thing. And there's one guy that, and it's in an indoor soccer field. That's where the practices and scrimmages are. This guy will like literally hang halfway into that like little tiny doorway that the kids move in and out of because everything's enclosed. Everything else is surrounded by glass. This guy is screaming orders at his kid of how to catch the ball, how to run, how to do this. It's so distracting. And his kid is unfortunately, he just doesn't execute very well. But I'm sure a lot of it has to do with the fact that he feels so much freaking pressure from the so coaches flustered. Yelling at him. Yeah. And his dad's yelling at him. We're like, holy crap, dude, do you have any idea? Like, let the coaches do their job. But I used to be that guy too. So I'm not proud of it. And I would never hang over the thing, but I'd yell things at them. But here's a humbling story. So when I played baseball and I wrestled. So like that was what I would coach the kids. Well, Mason, my football player, he's been playing football now since the third grade. He's like, Dad, I want to play football. And in my mind, I was like, sweet, man. I was like, been coaching a wrestling team, been coaching a baseball team for 3 years. I would actually love to sit on the sidelines and be a spectator again. And plus I know nothing about football when it comes to coaching. I know a little bit about the game, but not a whole lot because I didn't grow up playing it. And I will never forget showing up to practice, Mason's first football practice. Head coach comes over to me and he's like, hey man, he's like, I could really use, some help. Like I need a couple of extra hands, like, coaching, the team. And I was like, I just kind of laughed at him. I was like, I'm not your guy. And he kind of like looked at me up and down. He's like, well, you played, right? And I was like, I've never played organized football ever. He's like, well, do you know anything about it? I was like, well, I watch it on TV. I was like, I can't tell you like what to do. And I think he thought I was joking. And I was like, but I'll help. And well, anyway, long story short, I became like the joke of the entire team. Like these third graders would make fun of me because they're like, all right, guys, here's what we're going to do. We're going to learn this running play. It's a jet sweep. All you guys come over here. Coach Hagner, you have no idea what's going on. So come over here. I'm going to teach it to you too. It became like a really joke. So like, I'll never forget this really cool moment me and Mason had. I took him to Jimmy John's after practice and we're like halfway through the season. And Mason we're enjoying our sandwiches and Mason kind of like leans in. He's like, Dad, he goes, can I ask you a question? And I'm like, and anytime he asks that, I know he's been stewing on a question. He's still like that to this day. I'm like, yeah, man, what you got? And he goes, you really don't say a lot when we're at practice. Like all the other coaches are talking, but you're just kind of like, you hold the pads and you're more listening. I'm like, yeah. And he goes, in baseball, you weren't like that at all. Wrestling, you weren't like that at all. You were the guy who was telling us what to do. I was like, yeah. And he goes, do you have any idea what you're doing out there? And I just laughed and I go, you want to know a secret? And he goes, yeah. And I go, you really want to know? He's like, yeah. I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing out there. And we both just started laughing our asses off. He's like, well, why are you out there? And I said, here's why I'm out there. 2 reasons. Number one, I'm out there because of you. I want to be with you. I want to hang out with you. I want to I want to see you develop. And there's no other better way to do that than to be on the field with you. And I was like, and, I'm 40 something years old, and you're never too old to learn something new. I'm learning something every single week in practice about football that I never knew before. So
Yeah.
I'm actually loving it. Like, I might be quiet, but I'm loving it. And I think, that lesson went a long way. We still laugh about it to this day.
That's
That
funny.
conversation at Jimmy John's, man.
I love that. I love that. The thing one other thing that stood out about your story is women should never coach youth boys teams. Never. And please, before you get mad at me, not you, because I know you know me well enough. Before anybody listening gets mad, let me explain myself. First of all, to any woman who coaches a youth sports football team for boys because nobody else will step up, thank you. I mean, truly, like, you're doing it not because you want to do it, or even you should do it, but you're doing it because nobody else will.
Yep.
So thank you. This is not a diss on you at all. And men, step up. Look, I'm not here to judge. I know you have jobs. I know money could be tight for people. I know this is a busy time of year. I know you might feel like you don't know enough. There's a lot of reasons. Some I think are legitimate and others are not. You have kids. Stop pawning them off on other people. Raise them. Help raise them. And people say it takes a village. Sure, I can buy into that. Like, I want my sons to be around and my daughter to be around good people, the village. But also, I should be the loudest voice. I should have the most influence with my children. That should be me. Mm-hmm. I can't do that to your point, if you're not on the field with your son, even though you don't have any idea what you're doing. So guys, step up, start coaching. I see this in Boy Scouts, Cub Scouts. It's all run by women. Why do you think our boys are struggling? Women, it's not because of you, by the way. It's because men aren't stepping up into those roles. You're doing the best you can. You have a deficiency, and I'm not saying that in a mean spirit. You don't know what it's like to be a boy, and you don't know what it's like to be a man. And there's certain things that you'll never be able to usher a young man through. It takes a man to do that. I commend you for doing it in the absence of other men. But guys, take this as a sign. This is your sign to step up and start coaching these boys and helping them transition into manhood the way they ought to be transitioned into manhood.
I agree. And plus, I don't know how long your dad was around, but the guys who are in and out of my life, I'll never forget my stepdad. 1 year, just 1 year, was the assistant coach on my baseball team. And, we didn't have the closest of relationship, especially at that age, because he was pretty much on his way out. But my dad traveled all the time. And I remember, him being a part of that team. And I still remember it as a really cool experience, despite that there was tension between us, but besides there was tension between he and my mom. And I took a lot of pride in that. Like, you only get you got 15 players on the baseball team. And if your dad is one of the 2 or 3 that are helping coach like that, your son will take a lot of pride in that. The kids will take a lot of pride in that.
I agree, man. I think there's so many tremendous opportunities. We get so wrapped up in ourselves and what we have going on. And to a degree, we should worry about what our own goals are and desires and objectives and dreams and hopes, because our kids are going to see that. And they're going to be able to model that healthy behavior as you work towards a goal that you have. But if you can't find a way to stop and turn around and assist, again, I'm trying not to be judgmental here. I might have 2 years ago. Then I think you ought to find a way in life, and maybe some of your goals ought to revolve around how you can coach one of your kids' teams, or how you can take a little more time off from work, or how you can stop spending so much money so you can finally get out of debt. So you're not having to work 2 or 3 jobs at a time. So you can actually spend time with your family and lead them the way they're asking you to lead.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Larry, why don't you tell the guys where to connect with you? And I'll share as well, because I know we're going to be sharing this on my platform and your platform, because I thought this would be a really powerful way for us to share just our friendship. And some guys in my audience might not know of you, and vice versa. And actually, one of the cool things, I meant to say this, that I like about this is that we're in very similar niches with what we do. And I've never considered you competition, which so many people would, right? And I'm not going to share, and I'm not going to give them, and I'm not going to do this. And it just becomes this ridiculous internet battle or something. I don't quite know or understand what's going on there, but I really appreciate your willingness to share your insights with me and what's working for you. I hope I've been able to share that with you. And I think not only is it good for us, but I think it models how cooperation can help build something bigger than us doing it on our own.
I have the exact same viewpoint of this that you do. You're my friend first, and I've never viewed Order Man and Dad Edge as competing. In fact, I'll never forget this. I think this story will really hit home, and it's a quick one because I know we need to wrap up here. But I'll never forget when John Vroman back in 2016 decided to create Front Row Dads, and I went to his retreat, and he pulled me aside, and he's like, "Hey man, like I just want to talk to you." I'm like, and he looked like absolutely like paranoid, like he was scared to tell me whatever he was going to tell me. I was like, "Yeah, what's up?" And he goes, man, this is just the launching pad for me. Like I'm going to really go into this space like you have. And like, I'm friends with you. And I just kind of like smiled as he's talking. And he's like, I just don't want this to create a riff. Like, I don't want to just be competition. And then finally he's like, why are you smiling? And I was like, dude, I don't look at it that way at all. I was like, I really
No.
don't, John. I was like, we're friends. I was like, listen, how many billions of dads are out there? I don't know that number. I was like, but I can't serve them all. You can't serve them all. Like, what we actually need is 100,000 more Ryan Micklers, Larry Hagners, John Vromans, Brett McKay's. If we had that kind of huge movement to help men be better men, then the world is going to be a better place. And that's the main goal of this whole thing. I don't care at the end of this life whether guys did life with Order of Man or Dad Edge or somewhere else. If we had a touch point in somebody's journey where we did something positive and they can look back on their life and like, man, it was those guys that really helped in this season or that season or my marriage or with my kids or whatever, then mission accomplished, period. Right. And that's my view on it. And I'm pretty sure that's your view on it as well. But yeah, as far as, I mean, obviously finding me, thedadedge.com and the dad edge, everything like on Instagram, everywhere, not hard to find whatsoever, but that's where you can find me.
Awesome. We'll link it up. And for me,
Yeah.
it's Order Man,
Order
everything.
Man. Yeah.
Makes it easy. I'm actually most active on Instagram on my personal account, Ryan Mickler. But
Yeah.
other than that, it's Order Man. You can figure out everything we're doing.
Yeah.
Larry, I appreciate you, man. I'm
Back
excited for
at you.
what the next almost 9 years has in
Right.
store for us. The highs and the lows and the goods and the bads. And I'm sure we'll be there for each other as celebrating our wins and propping each other up as needed in the downs and in the trenches. But appreciate our friendship first and foremost, like you said, and the opportunity to have this conversation. I think it's going to serve a lot of the guys listening.
Same, brother. I love your heart. I love where you're at. And to be quite honest, man, sometimes I think about this. I'll wrap with this. I think about, I don't know how many years it's going to be to where we're doing this work. Let's just say it's at least another decade, right? But I wonder what it's going to be like, you and I meeting up, having whatever, right? And just discussing like, dude, look at what the past 20 years have been like, and just smiling about it, and enjoying it, and just taken back and knowing that there was a movement and people's lives were changed because of it. I'm excited about that conversation with you.
Yes, sir. We'll have it when that time comes. All right,
Yeah,
brother.
man.
Thanks
All right,
again.
see you, man. You bet.